insurance and superannuation.
Okay, thanks, Paul.
Cheers.
Hi everyone, my name's Paul Watson. I'm from Morris Blackburn Lawyers. I work in the superannuation and insurance area, and I do a lot of work with some of the disability groups around Melbourne, some interstate as well. Basically, what my role is with Morris Blackburn is making sure that the people in the disability sector and in the health industry are well informed about the sort of issues that we see on a sort of day-to-day basis. Of particular importance, I suppose, are a few things. First, I'll just cover briefly on the employment law issues. Quite often, people who are suffering from an illness or a disability face a number of questions, first and foremost, which are things like, do I have to tell my employer about whatever illness or injury that I suffer from? And you know, what are my rights in reducing my work hours or those sorts of things? We have produced these booklets, which will give you a very brief and basic understanding of what your rights are, and they're over there on the edge of the table. I can hand them out later if you like. But the general rule with employment law, at least, is that you don't have to tell your employer about an illness or an injury. The exception, I suppose, to that rule is in a situation where your illness or your injury might make you an occupational health and safety risk for yourself or any of your colleagues. Okay, so you know, it varies, and I suppose it's up to really a judgment call on any individual. But if you need advice about it, if you're not sort of sure, feel free just to give us a call, and we can at least give you a basic idea of what your particular situation is. I mean, the standard sort of situation, I try and give examples which are, say, someone with serious epilepsy maybe, who is a construction worker working, you know, 20 floors up on a city skyscraper. That's going to be, without a doubt, some sort of an occupational health and safety risk, and so you would need to disclose it. But if it was someone who maybe suffered with epilepsy but worked in an office environment, well, maybe that's not. Okay.
Great.
Obviously, if there's things like balance issues and that sort of things, then maybe that contributes to you being an occupational health and safety risk. So there's a lot of grey areas, and it's important that, you know, if you should disclose, that you do. Certainly, our view is that you should always be upfront and honest with your employers, because they can usually, they're usually pretty understanding, and they'll usually try and help you out by, you know, modifying your workstation or allowing you time off for medical treatment and that sort of thing. So the next thing that I wanted to discuss, I suppose, is the other side of things, which is usually when people suffer from an injury or an illness that's, I suppose, you know, significant, one of the things they have to do is either reduce their work hours or stop work altogether. And obviously, when they do, the first thing that becomes a problem is usually a mortgage or you know, their finances. And a lot of people sort of are just not aware of what they might be able to do about that. First of all, if you suffer from an injury or illness that stops you from being able to work, then you can gain access early, before you reach age 60, to your superannuation contributions. Okay, now normally if you do that, you can do what's called a financial hardship claim under your super fund, but if you do that, you pay 21.5% tax on anything that you take out of your super fund, and the most that you can get is $10,000 per annum. Okay, but if you suffer from an injury or an illness and you take it out on the grounds of permanent incapacity, then the vast majority of that benefit is likely to be tax-free. Okay, so it's important that you know, I suppose, the different ways of doing that. Now, the second side of this is, of course, that most super funds these days offer life and disability insurance cover, that you might be able to claim depending on your situation. So I'm sure you guys have seen all of the ads on telly from industry super funds and those sorts of things, and they all provide, pretty much every one of them I think these days provides disability insurance cover. So what that disability cover means is that there's usually two sorts of cover. One is called temporary disability insurance and one's total and permanent disability insurance. So the temporary disability benefits are usually monthly benefits that are payable usually for 2 years, but sometimes they're payable all the way until age 65. The other sorts of benefits that are sometimes available are the lump sum permanent disability benefits, which are once-off lump sum benefits, and basically to get them you have to be able to satisfy the super fund and their insurer that on the balance of probability you're not going to be able to work again in a job within your education, training and experience. Okay, now that last bit I said is really important because it's all about what you know and about your education and your past work experience. For example, someone who maybe has a limited education who left school in year 8 or something and became a labourer or a construction worker, an insurer wouldn't be able to reject their claim on the basis that they can do a clerical job. I mean, if they don't have those skills or the education or the ability to do that job, then they can't do that. Okay. So it's important, I suppose, the other thing that is really important, I think, is the other side of it, which is how do you go about actually getting insurance if you suffer from a disability? And most people are of the belief that they can't, because if they go and approach AXA or MLC or one of those guys, they will get, a 25-page glossy brochure where they have to disclose every illness they've ever had, and at the end of it, it will be subject to their own underwriting manuals, which in almost any situation, particularly of a neurological condition, they won't go near it. They simply won't insure you because you're too high a risk. But under the superannuation policies, that's not the case. Because the superannuation funds have these large, what they call group life insurance policies, they're not subject at the initial stage, in almost every situation at least, they're not subject to a health disclosure. So what that means is, for example, someone who might already have scars, they would be able to join, let's say, an industry superannuation fund, and despite the fact that they already suffered from that condition, they would still be able to lodge a claim for total and permanent disability if they had to later stop work. So as long as there is employment, as long as you're still in the workforce, and as long as there are contributions from your employer going in, then you're entitled to be covered for total and permanent disability through these superannuation funds. Now, I think you probably remember a few years ago, John Howard changed some of the legislation and introduced a thing called super choice, which means whereas in the past you had to basically be a member of the super fund that your employer paid into, but now you get to choose, in almost all cases at least, you get to choose. If you're subject to an enterprise bargaining agreement and it specifically says, then yes, you do have to still stick with that fund. But that aside, you can choose what super fund you're in. What that has meant is that all of the super funds have been competing with one another about, what can they do to try and attract more members.